Okay. I think we're recording, so good morning, everybody. Really glad you're here. I got to get this out of here. Okay, only one. Otherwise, I'm in a fishbowl.
Hello.
Sometimes I forget, how to eat in the mornings. I just need to double check my recording because it seems like, was it last time? Yeah. Okay, I think we're going. I just want to take the first few minutes just to again express my appreciation for you guys coming and being in this process with me. It's one thing to come and do what we've been doing for 5 years. I think it's another thing to come and listen to somebody read to you. But I do really appreciate it so much, not just for the support in the process, but really it's so necessary. Like I wish I was a kind of writer that could just hole up in my little cave, and there's part of that that's true, but really being able to be in the room with people and watch them hear what I'm saying and then have a conversation about it. Even just the thought of coming and seeing your faces, like this morning, as I was thinking about that, I suddenly saw these big pieces of this particular chapter that I need to fill in, and so hopefully we can talk about them as we go. But if I didn't have you here, or even like the anticipation of you being here, I just think I get very, tunnel vision, and so I just want to say thank you for hanging in there with the process for me, with me, together. Again, a little context. I think it's really good to have the context. I want to tell you an update, though. I think this kind of represents the first chunk of the book. I started with kind of my story and then my explanation. So there's one chapter on my story and then one chapter on how I see the soul, or what I mean by the word soul. A lot of you were here for that. And then there are these 5 chapters, that these 2 are even finished. So the first part, at least the first half. It might be more than half in the machine. So really happy about that, and I can't wait to share these other 2 chapters with you guys. And these 2 will round out our whole year. So I think that's a little bit coincidental too. So today we are going to talk about, I guess I should pull this up. We're going to talk about very disorganized this morning. You might want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
Kind of
I'm the only entrance. Okay. Yes, you're trapped. You all are trapped. I had thought about moving us over there. Maybe I'll do that next time because it's just so much easier to. I don't have to drag this over, but I'm not sure. It's colder over there. Okay.
But we could always scooch that couch and chair back of us.
If we need to, yeah. She said she can open it.
Because I probably can't go an hour and a half.
Yeah, and feel free. And so we're going to mostly talk about why it's so hard. And I just put those 4 things up there by way of an outline, because mostly to impress you that I have an actual sort of outline. So you don't have to do anything with that unless you want to remember. Okay? So, and then I'd like to talk about a lot of these things, and also these are the big questions that I thought of that I sort of left out. What about we who dare mildly instead of greatly? And what about community, which is always a big what about whenever I'm talking about things. So if you're ready, then this is a chapter called The Soul is Singular. Today you are you, that is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you. Dr. Seuss. I need to get a new personality, Kim said with a smile in her voice that was evident even over the phone. No problem. Let's make an appointment and I'll get right on it, I quipped in return. Already I liked this woman. Anyone who can lightheartedly banter with a prospective therapist about a serious matter has a lot going for her. What makes you think you need a new personality? I asked. People at work get mad at me all the time. My boss says I need to learn some people skills. It seems to happen a lot, and I'm the common denominator in all these conflicts, so maybe I just need to get a new personality. The smile was gone, replaced by a sense of resignation. Kim arrived in my office determined to face the music and learn what she needed to do to play well with others on the job. As we began to work together, however, a few things became clear to me. Number one, Kim is a very intelligent and capable woman, highly skilled in several vocational fields. 2, Kim is working in a chaotic and highly dysfunctional company in an industry that is widely known to be chaotic and highly dysfunctional, and she is the person responsible for teaching them to toe the legal line, a setup for conflict if I've ever seen one. 3, Kim has a high regard for honesty, logic, accuracy, and personal responsibility, and expects that others do as well, especially when the consequences of not being so puts the company at enormous risk. Number 4, Kim has little tolerance for managers who hire her to help them with basic legal compliance, but then resist every effort she makes to serve them in that capacity. Number 5, Kim is so willing to look at her own role in the conflicts to the point of wondering what could be wrong with her, that she's unable to see that her bosses have made her a scapegoat in their company, simultaneously requesting and refusing the advice they hired her to give, and instead blame her for being the problem as she becomes more and more frustrated by their self-destructive behavior. 6, Kim is unable to see her own unique brilliance in the world despite some legitimate brain vulnerabilities that make her an unconventional person. 7, Kim doesn't need a new personality. She needs to get out of Dodge and begin the hard work of building a vocation that honors her unique talents and vulnerabilities. Kim argued with my assessment every step of the way, but eventually she walked out of that job and into one that valued her unique brand of brilliance. Her struggles to accept herself continue, of course, but she's no longer looking to purchase a new personality. Denise. I glanced desperately at the clock, hoping the session would be over soon. I was dismayed to discover it was only 2:15 p.m. I'd been sitting with Denise only 15 minutes, but I was fighting to stay awake. Eyelids fluttering, my vision going blurry, I pinched myself to keep from nodding off, shifted my posture in the chair, took deep breaths to keep from yawning as she spoke. This is not good, I said to myself. Soon she's bound to notice that I am less than riveted here. Plus, I was bewildered. I have an innate love and fascination with people. Being a therapist is as natural to me as breathing. So what was going on? What was wrong with me? First, I thought it must be the time of day I'm seeing Denise. Afternoons are difficult for lots of people. Perhaps I should see her in the morning. But no, the same thing happened during a morning session. Every session I spent with Denise, I fought desperately to stay awake. It's not as if she lacked emotion. She often cried, talked of conflicts with her husband and children, described symptoms of depression and anxiety just like many of my other clients, but for some reason I drifted off when she was speaking. This went on for several weeks until one session, 20 minutes in, I found myself on the edge of my seat, engaged, connected, and not the least bit sleepy. Over the next weeks, I experienced similar breakthroughs with Denise, periods of overwhelming sleepiness followed by intense attention and interest. Eventually, I began to suspect that the issue lay not with my sleep habits nor with whatever I had eaten for lunch, but with Denise herself. The times in which I found myself engaged and awake were times when Denise was allowing her honest self to seep through. The times I fell asleep were times in which she was playing a role, pretty well playing a role, the role of a good patient. She was showing up with a script she thought was appropriate, choosing topics she thought she should be talking about, expressing emotions she thought were appropriate to the role. But the real Denise was only there when her real distress could not be packaged according to her expectations. When the real Denise leaked through, I naturally snapped to attention. When I asked about her relationship with her husband, she was quite forthcoming about the kind of expectations he had of her as a wife. It soon became clear that Denise was trying very hard to be a certain kind of person, a person more like her husband, who, as it turned out, was nothing like his wife. Unconsciously playing the part of the wife and mother she thought she should be instead of being her actual self was how she presented in the counseling office. No wonder I was bored. Thankfully, as we gently pushed back on the expectations Denise had for herself and began to identify and honor her more authentic qualities, her sessions became more lively and her symptoms began to lessen. Denise was becoming herself, and the vitality she was tapping into as a result was palpable. One more story. Tim. Every appointment I had with Tim I suspected would be my last. Not exactly comfortable sharing his inmost thoughts and feelings, Tim was understandably hard to read. Symptoms of anxiety, agitation, and a vague sense of lostness drove him to seek counseling, but for the life of me I could not discover what his underlying conflict was. Apart from the immediate issues he brought to his sessions, like worries over family members, tumultuous romantic relationships, and difficulties on the job, I had a nagging feeling I was missing something essential, and because of that I experienced a vague sense of dissatisfaction with the course of his treatment. I assumed he was feeling similarly, so I figured any day now he would drop out altogether, but he kept coming back. Eventually I pieced together a story that was mildly tumultuous. His family moved often, forcing Tim to do what he could to fit into new situations. Sports and partying paved over an underlying frustration and anger, until he decided he'd better pull himself together and become an adult. Business degree in hand, he moved to Colorado, determined to succeed in sales like his father had. One small problem: he hated sales, hated his boss, hated his job with a passion, and a hatred he tried to numb through generous amounts of marijuana on a daily basis. Our sessions were largely unfocused, me providing the most rudimentary kinds of reflection. You seem to have a need to help the ones you love, to the point of personal sacrifice. You seem to have a strong set of people skills. You have a creative side that goes largely unexpressed. You have a strong need for community and work at forming it wherever you go. Not exactly brilliant psychological interventions, these. I wondered when a unifying theme might appear. Tim was struggling to focus, wrestling with deep dissatisfaction. Poor guy, I thought he's too complicated for his own good. During one recent session, he told me about a random conversation he had had on a plane with a man whose job was in the field of alternative energy. Tim confessed he had always had an interest in alternative energy. Animated, he went on to express a fascination with the possibility of hydrogen as a fuel source. "I love that shit, man," he said. Excuse me, what? Where did this come from? My highly social, good old boy lost in the woods has an interest in science? Further questioning revealed an aptitude toward science and math he had neglected to report, assuming it had nothing to do with his need for counseling. He related a story from high school in which he showed up for a calculus final, completely unprepared, massively high, and fully prepared to flunk. Turns out he aced it 100%. Caught completely by surprise, my mouth hung open for several seconds in a very unprofessional way. Who does that, I wondered? What kind of person aces a calculus test, unstudied and under the influence? A closeted genius, I concluded. You could have led with that 6 months ago, I said. He shrugged. No idea this oh-by-the-way anecdote would point to the missing piece on which his entire future would pivot. Here was the underlying theme I was looking for. Super smart lost child with a strong interest in people, scrambling to fit into changing school situations way too often. Academics were no problem for him compared to navigating the dangers of high school social politics, in which nerdiness would do him no favors. not to mention a home environment that valued hard work above everything, including personal interests. Invisible brilliance and a divergent mix of natural abilities became heavy burdens for him to carry. Pot not only numbed the ontological angst he would otherwise experience just by being himself, it also created a literal smokescreen, hiding his potential from the world. His current plan to settle down and build a career in sales became deeply unsatisfying, motivated as it was by his need to prove his worth the only way he knew how, following his father's footsteps. Tim's life came suddenly into focus. As I write this, he is preparing to enter a master's program in energy economics at a renowned technological university. The scattered pieces of his uniqueness have pulled together to offer a coherent future more in line with his complex mix of gifts. Deep frustration has been left by the wayside, replaced by an invigorating combination of fear and excitement for the future. Tim is on his way. The soul is singular. It insists on being itself. Every moment we show up falsely, we dampen our presence in the world. Nothing seems more obvious than this, especially since we're inundated daily with 127 admonitions to be ourselves. Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest memes abound. A quick internet search for Be Yourself quotes yielded 490 of them on Goodreads alone. And here are some of my favorites. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Oscar Wilde. Don't you ever let a soul in the world tell you that you can't be exactly who you are. Lady Gaga. Your need for acceptance can make you invisible in this world. Don't let anything stand in the way of the light that shines through this form. Risk being seen in all your glory. Jim Carrey. I will not hide my tastes or aversions. I will so trust that what is deep is holy, that I will do strongly before the sun and moon whatever only rejoices me, and the heart appoints. That's Ralph Waldo Emerson. I think Dostoevsky was right that every human being must have a point at which he stands against the culture where he says, "This is me and the damned world can go to hell." Rollo May. And those who have a strong sense of love and belonging have the courage to be imperfect. Brene Brown. I hope you're as inspired as I am. Reading these, I can feel the wind in my sails. I feel supported and encouraged to go out there and be myself. It's so logical, so simple, so blinking obvious. Of course it makes no sense to try and be something I'm not. Of course I should only and always be just exactly who I am. If only the passionate admonitions of authors and celebrities would be enough to make it happen. I'm going to pause here to suggest that if you're one of those people who truly love and accept themselves and only need permission from a meme or two to remind you to relax and be yourself, you might want to skip ahead and read the next chapter. Congratulations, good for you. Really, I don't mind. You'll only be frustrated here, and frankly, I don't want to imagine you reading this, scratching your head and saying, I don't get it. It's very intimidating, and some of us are feeling a little fragile, okay? Don't worry, we'll catch up with you in chapter 7. The rest of this chapter is for those of us, including myself, who enthusiastically cling to quotes as these. We write them in our journals, circulate them as memes on social media, and plaster them on the walls where we can see them daily. We are also the ones who, deep down, no matter how hard we try, cannot fully believe them. The rest of the chapter is for us. And now that it's just us, I have to ask, why is it so hard? Why do so few of us seem to be fully at ease with ourselves, ready to risk offering our unique selves in the world? The poet Sylvia Plath expressed it best when she wrote this about being oneself. Very few people do this anymore. It's too risky. First of all, it's a hell of a responsibility to be yourself. It's much easier to be somebody else or nobody at all. Despite her brilliance as a writer and poet, the fact she committed suicide at the age of 32 lends credence to the idea that for some of us, deep risk accompanies the invitation to be only and always ourselves. So what is going on here? Being myself seems like the easiest, most no-brainer task in all of life. Then why do I find it so intimidating? I believe there are at least 4 factors that make being oneself extremely difficult for some of us. 1. Attachment or belonging versus individuation. 2. Protecting the precious. 3. Facing death. And 4. Standing alone. One way to frame the struggle of human development is to look at it as a confluence of 2 primal developmental tasks: attachment and individuation. Attachment is the primal bond we experience from the womb, a drive to connect that keeps us alive. Starting with mother and widening to include family, friends, social groups, communities, and beyond, the drive to attach and belong becomes a hallmark of healthy human development. The survival of the human race throughout the ages has depended in large part on the strength of belonging to groups. Families, tribes, clans, and other types of societal connections have been essential life and death necessities. Early humans learned by experience that belonging to a cohesive group means survival, and separation from the group means death. Conformity to group norms enhances belonging, and belonging enhances the likelihood of living long enough to reproduce. Outliers and nonconformists mostly did not survive. Human cultural evolution moves much faster than human genetic evolution, however. So even though most of us are no longer literally threatened by nonconformity, our not quite yet evolved brains don't really believe it. Every time we step out of line or risk our belonging in any way, an alarm goes off in the deepest, most primitive part of the brain, the part of the brain that lives by the ancient rule, belong or die. We want to belong. We need to belong. But nonconformity rattles a place deep in the deepest part of the brain, an evolutionary hangover from the time when humans were new on the scene and belonging to the tribe was literally a matter of life and death. The fact that it is no longer true means very little. At odds with the imperative to conform in order to belong is the powerful drive to individuate. We need to belong, sure, but we also need to make our mark in the world, to express our uniqueness in a significant way. Individuation is an integrative developmental task, an instinctive process that will eventually press its agenda right alongside and often in conflict with whatever else is going on in our lives. Individuation is the natural movement of the soul, an organic process that begins to emerge at strategic stages in life, assuming all other basic needs are met, according to Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And I just want to kind of put in a little comment about that. We have the privilege of individuating, because our survival needs are met, our housing needs are met, our safety needs are met, mostly our belonging needs are met. And some of these other, I forget all the stages, but I just want to say, I do know that. I think that even in the poorest, most desperate situations, there's still a soul that's moving and operating and bringing comfort and doing its job. But when you're busy trying to survive, we don't have a lot of time for contemplation. In an ideal world, we would grow up in human systems that support the development of our true selves in the context of robust conditions for belonging. Strict conformity to arbitrary norms would not be necessary for survival, so we would never have to choose between belonging and being ourselves. Unfortunately, the history of humanity is a history of deprivation and suffering, yet still the human soul persists. The soul insists on being its singular, unique, one and forever authentic self despite the obstacles in its way. Just like a tree will simply become a tree and nothing else, despite the soil and weather conditions in which it finds itself, the soul will always move to express itself despite its environment. Nevertheless, we continue to believe at a subconscious level there's simply too much at stake for all the reasons listed above. That means that most of us spend our first 20 years surviving our childhoods, the second 20 years living by the rules we made up in our childhoods, and the third 20 years deconstructing and reimagining a new way to live. Roughly speaking, that is. Individual results may vary. The smart move is to recognize the soul's pull toward authentic expression and move to cooperate in whatever way we can, despite the resistance lodged in our primitive brains. If we recognize that attachment was necessary in early life and individuation is necessary in later life, we can yield to the process of individuation and increase our chances of success, right? But there's more. In addition to the instinctive drives of belonging and individuating, being oneself is, as Sylvia Plath admitted, a hell of a responsibility. The reason it seems much easier to be somebody else or nobody at all is that part of us knows these to be facsimiles. If we put up a self that at some level we know is false, if that self fails, gets rejected, or withers into oblivion, the fact that it's a facsimile softens the blow. We instinctively know that our real essence remains intact because we didn't risk the prototype by going all in. Smart, right? This is the dynamic I call protecting the precious. Being oneself is a huge gamble. If we risk it and win, we break into the light of truth. If we risk it and lose, we believe we have nothing left. This feels like a lifelong game of high-stakes personality poker. Wisely, we create an aspect of our ego who's always trying to broker that risk for us, keeping an eye out for all the possible dangers, holding us back from going all in on any given hand. What never occurs to us is that this part rarely makes it to the other side of any risk, its prime directive being prevention. Nevertheless, that's the part we trust to call the shots. This internal risk manager is looking out for our well-being. It just happens to be wrong most of the time. What the risk manager fails to understand is, as adults, no risk of loss, like the loss of relationship, rejection, failure, or exile, can compare with the cost we have already paid in order to be somebody else or nobody at all. It may seem to be easier to be somebody else or nobody at all, but not for long. Eventually, our true self needs to shine through, and this is what the soul is always inviting us to do. Letting go of the facsimiles, the self-defenses, the ego-driven identities, and the repression of our true impulses is required in order to emerge as a sane and healthy, whole, and integrated human being. This is a call to freedom, vitality, fulfillment, and wholeness. But to the ego, it can feel like the sentence of death. But only because it is. As a psychotherapist, I often get to play the role of hospice worker for the ego. People seek me out because they're panicked, their lives aren't working, catastrophe of some kind has struck, or perhaps their internal world is collapsing and all their efforts are for naught. Their suffering is palpable. But like a good hospice worker, I sit with them. I hold space for their pain, whispering that death comes for us all, and that new life awaits them beyond their current suffering. Then I kindly suggest that what feels like death is merely the ego giving up control, and that vitality and freedom are waiting on the other side. I've been through enough of these death scenes, my own included, to honor the process as a sacred passage. To the constructed self, the process of becoming whole is a kind of death. Letting go of our favorite ego defenses feels too dangerous to risk, so we keep those schemes running as long as we possibly can. Most of us hold tight to our defenses until failure of some kind pries them from our cold, dead fingers. When that happens, we feel traumatically bereft. It actually feels like we're dying. I've also been through enough of these death scenes to confidently declare that the ego is a world-class drama queen, and what looks like death is merely the doorway to a new way of living. We just need to get to the other side. Standing alone. Early in my career, I worked with a woman named Jane who came to counseling to deal with mild depression, anxiety, and a feeling of general dissatisfaction with her life. She wanted to find out what was wrong with her and fix it, a typical presentation. Jane worked as a filmmaker, a job for which she had no formal training but had somehow fallen into. Her current contract was producing training films for heart surgeons, commissioned by a nationally known medical university. She was frustrated and incredulous, working with some of the top heart surgeons in the country because they were resisting some of her recommendations, treating her rudely, and acting as if they were ignorant of some of the obvious aspects of their own jobs. Her interactions with these surgeons left her feeling inadequate, stressed, and more than a little bit crazy. After all, they were the experts in their field. She was merely the filmmaker. She wondered what could be wrong with her and how to cope with the stress of her job. I soon realized that Jane had no awareness of her own brilliance. She saw herself as a regular person who got lucky in her career and now was feeling as if she was in over her head. Her main confusion, however, the thing that made her feel completely crazy, was how these top surgeons could be so oblivious to core aspects of this project that seemed completely obvious to her. Her stress emanated from the fact that she could only see herself to blame, and no one else. She never once considered that she may be as smart as, or smarter in some regards, than these renowned surgeons, and that the only way to complete the project was to believe this and act accordingly. This was not on her list of things wrong with her that she could fix. As the truth began to dawn on her, she was able to gather her authority, persuade the surgeons to cooperate with her plan, and finish the project. I will never forget two things about this case. First, the look on her face when the truth began to dawn on her. As she grappled with the possibility that she knew more than this group of top surgeons, I saw the pieces of her self-image rearrange themselves before my eyes. Pure incredulity morphed into a slow-motion aha. The second thing I will never forget is the grief and loneliness she began to feel as she embraced the truth of her own competency. She realized that she was at the top of her field. There was no one above her or ahead of her that she could fall back on, no one to take her under their wing and nurture her. She had somehow made it to the top of her field, and as she looked around, she was dismayed to discover that she was not only without mentors, she was without peers. As we listen and respond to the soul's call to emerge into the world always and only as ourselves, along with the freedom and vitality that brings, another little hitch can arise to hold us back, and it is this: to be singular is to be, in a very real sense, alone. Whether we're brilliant like Jane or just regular like the rest of us, there is truly no one else who can be us, literally no one else. Yes, the primitive brain is warning us against standing out from the crowd, and we acknowledge that and move ahead anyway. Yes, we move through the risks of letting ourselves be seen, and we discover we didn't die after all. Yes, as we do this, we feel the current of vitality and expansion flowing through us in a way we never thought possible. Nevertheless, when we honor our exquisite singularity, we assume sole responsibility for who we are. Sink or swim, stand or fall, we offer the prototype and wait to see what happens. No excuses, no takebacks. Total responsibility with no reserve. And as we face the truth that there's no one like us, and while that is undoubtedly a glorious and even sacred thing, we begin to sense the aloneness of it all. Deep inside, we rightly pause to consider the cost, because the cost is real. We are totally alone in our uniqueness. It is indeed a hell of a responsibility. So give yourself a break. Becoming an authentic person is hard. The deck is stacked against you in many ways, and few have the courage to stay the course. Yet here you are, feeling your soul's invitation to let your freak flag fly, looking for inspiration to risk the big reveal. Congratulations for getting this far. I think you're going to make it. The soul is indeed singular, insists on being soul, and knows the immense value and glory of its own uniqueness. The soul is always moving to bring itself forth by whatever means necessary, knowing that the reward of wholeness is worth the painful process of becoming. And while I truly believe it's hard to become a whole, authentic person, the activating process is deceptively simple. The key to it all is self-acceptance, the act of reattaching to and thus belonging to your own soul. Self-acceptance means I no longer have to despise myself for being overweight, disorganized, forgetful, and avoidant. I can quit apologizing for my nonconformity, my inconsistency, and my failure to reach my manufactured ideals. I can forgive myself for being spatially and procedurally challenged and try to trust the way I do things, even when these ways get me in trouble from time to time. I used to think the path to self-acceptance was to argue with my list of faults and convince myself I'm awesome instead, or to find a list of positive traits that outweighs the list of negative ones, as if that would somehow convince me of my worth. It's a common misconception that only leads to exhaustion. Accepting myself doesn't mean I think that all the ways I am are the best ways to be. I understand what it costs to live with my shortcomings, some days more than others. Pockets of self-loathing still erupt from time to time, and I take a quick trip to I Suckville. Some of that self-loathing is just a nasty habit, and some of it comes from the apparent crime of being imperfect, a crime for which I find it difficult both to grant and receive absolution. Accepting myself means that all the parts of me can belong to me. They can come to the table and play on the team. They're entitled to love and belonging without judgment simply because they are, poor things. Even the ego, fresh from its collection of Oscar-worthy death scenes, is welcome here. It's just not allowed to rule anymore. I can relax and be and act without the usual scolding from the inner critic at the end of every day. This alone opens up a huge amount of mental space that can be used to create all kinds of things, including the capacity to listen to that other voice, the nourishing wisdom that is always emanating from deep in my soul. So go ahead, be yourself. And just in case you need one more bit of famous person inspiration, I saved the best for last. This is from the renowned choreographer Martha Graham. There's a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and will be lost. Don't let yourself be wasted. Your soul knows exactly what it's doing. So give in, trust, die, live. The best is yet to come.